take this opportunity to speak a little bit on some issues and the opportunity to take the pulse of where communities of color are here, our communities of color, and then we will get to some housekeeping with the NAACP, and then we will continue on with the program. Again, I'd like to welcome everybody. And I'd like to coin, can you all hear me? I'd like to coin, is there a volume? Doesn't work. Okay. I'd like to coin my message here in two phrases as we reflect today on the day that we're celebrating Black History. And one is that I believe that our community, such as all communities of color in this country, are at a crossroads. The second phrase that I would like to coin, which is part of my message, is that we, as a community of color, must do right by ourselves. We as a community have been through a history of struggles, and we as a community of color owe a debt to our ancestors and to that struggle that has brought us to where we are today. The young people in the room here are the living dreams of many who sacrificed to be able to live the lives that they live today. But I feel that our generation, in some ways, is dropping the ball in not keeping the memory alive of what brought us to this point. And to the young people here, you know, it's important to realize that you do have a debt. You have a debt to those who came before you. And that the opportunities that you have now were not like that when many of us were younger. And that debt means that you have to carry the torch and bring your community to the next level. And many times our young people feel that because, you know, they're getting $300 sneakers and because, you know, we're giving them everything that we want them to have, that we have to struggle for, they many times feel that that door has been opened so much that the struggle has ended. And it couldn't be further from the truth. The face of racism in this country and in this community on Long Island has changed. And the face of racism no longer bites you with a growl. It bites you with a smile. And it's very seldom the racism of my childhood where somebody comes up to you and says the N-word or the S-word or burns a cross. Today, my friends, racism is done with a calculator. A calculator in which the sum total is always the same, and that is an inequity in our community. And it's so sophisticated, that formula, that many times for us it's difficult. It's difficult to identify it as racism because it's so sophisticated and designed to appear like something else. But when we look at things that we accept in everyday life here, it's so clear when it's broken down. When we look at our educational system here on Long Island, which is clearly a two-tier educational system, one for the wealthy and one for the poor. And all you have to do is go through our schools and see the resources in the wealthier districts, in the North Shore, where students are going on school trips to France. And you go to poorer districts, where they can't afford smart boards and all the things that they need for their classrooms. And when you look again at that formula, the racist formula, it's a formula that bases the amount of funds that your school gets based on home values. Now, wouldn't logic tell you that a community that has millionaire mansions is obviously going to get a windfall for their community? And one that has lower home values is going to get less. That formula and that racism and that inequity is built right into the system. And today, in order for us to battle against racism, we have to change our methods as well. The same way racism has morphed, our tactics have to morph. It's no longer going to be resolved by walking down the street with a sign. In the 60s, we did what we had to do, and that had to be done at that time. But the face of racism was different. Today, we have the opportunity to take that calculator in our hand and change the formula. But we must first identify it. We must first identify those inequities. And when we're talking about education, when we go to higher education, the same inequity exists. The wealthier student goes to college, mom and dad pay for his education, and when he graduates, he's making money from day one. The person of color has taken so many loans that by the time he graduates, he's behind the 8 ball even after he has accomplished a milestone in his life. And that inequity is built in. And we look at history and we see how the racists have done us wrong. We see how the laws in this country have done us wrong. How when slavery was ended, that our Constitution says that no man can be held in bondage and forced to work unless they are in prison. And then the Jim Crow laws came out and designed to put people of color in prison so that they can be forced into labor. We cannot let that memory fade to our young people. To our young people who are getting those $300 sneakers, they have to realize what came before them. We have a whole generation that's losing touch of the debt that we owe those who struggled before us. And we can't lose sight of that. The racists have done us wrong. Many of the laws have done us wrong. Many things in our educational system has done us wrong as a community of color. But I must say that we have to do right by ourselves as well. And that we cannot lose focus of what we have also done to ourselves and continue to do that sometimes hold us back. And we're in a different place today. There was a time, and most of the old timers from Long Island, from Brentwood, Bayshore, Central High said, no, there was a time when the thought of an elected official of color was something really remote. Very remote. And people of color involved in politics is if the powers that be were nice enough to let us in and shut the door behind us, but you better behave, and you better not ask for too much of the piece of the pie, otherwise you won't be treated so well. And traditionally, we have been divided as a community. We have been divided as a community and used against each other. And we as a community have to continually identify racism and not lend ourselves to those who hurt our community. We cannot be idealistic and feel that because some elected official or somebody in power is making us feel important personally, that we're going to lend ourselves to promote people who are hurting our community. We can't stand in photo ops with people who are poisoning our parks. We can't have a congressman who wants to make his political career on the backs of creating hate against Muslims. And yet, if he gives us awards, we'll stand there and we'll allow him to promote himself in our community. We cannot lend ourselves for those things because we hurt ourselves. Our organizations have been used for that purpose too. Many of you know that I was a police officer. I worked as a police officer for 20 years. And I had the unfortunate circumstances of in the 80s of having to take legal action against my police department. I joined with the African American Latino cops and we came out and we had a press conference in the 80s and spoke about the things that we saw at that time. And for the first time, it wasn't a verbal saying this was happening to me, it was police officers. And I went through a lot for many years. We were successful in the lawsuit, and today our police department is in a different place. It is more progressive. As any police department throughout the country, changes still need to come about. We see what's happening nationwide, and changes have to come about, but believe me, we're in a way different place than we were then. When I first became an elected official, I found members of my own particular group making their careers on the backs of anti-immigrant sentiments in this county. And I had to stand up to people who were part of the power structure that I was part of. And yet, we did have people in our community lending themselves for that, allowing themselves to be used. We had legislators here going on billboards promoting anti-Latino sentiments. One in particular, she went on and spoke about how Latinos, even if they are given the opportunity, will not live legal lives because they come here to break the law. This was said on Lou Dobbs. And some people in this community, because their egos were stroked, lent themselves for that. We have to do right by ourselves. We cannot diminish the struggles that came before us. We can't cheapen the struggle of those who came before us. And we have to keep our heads up with pride, and we cannot do that if we're selling ourselves cheap to anybody who pays attention to us or who promises an individual opportunity. But we as a community have to be that moral compass that polices our own. And we can't reward that within our community. We cannot reward those who, for personal gain, try and use a minority community to advance a destructive force in our community. We are suffering from environmental racism here, as well as many other inequities at the hands of those who have ideologies, who believe in socialism for the rich and free market for the poor, who are totally against raising any minimum wage, totally against anything that will help a struggling community to have some economic development, who will invest millions of dollars to create a snack bar in a wealthy community in their marina, but will not invest to fix the potholes on Suffolk Avenue. We as a community have to hold them accountable, but we can't do that unless we respect ourselves, unless we hold our heads up high, unless we police ourselves and stop rewarding those who lend themselves to be able to hurt our community.